you. All right. Well, welcome everybody. And once again, if you had trouble with Eventbrite, we apologize. We will try to make it better and try to find a way to get the word out and get you connected more easily in the future. But I'm thrilled to be here, and I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy comprising the Siksika, the Piikani, and the Kainai First Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, the Bearspaw, and the Wesley First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. We're thrilled to be here. Just a reminder that we are here with the same Zoom codes every Thursday from 12 to 1. This term we have events going until December the 10th. We will start up again in January, probably the second week, but I'll make sure that you know before the end of this session what we have planned for the new year. Free, you can register or try to register through Eventbrite. The full program details are, of course, on our website, but we've also been promoting through Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. You're welcome to subscribe to our mailing list if you want all of the news delivered into your inbox. Of course, we're happy to do that. Just a few housekeeping notes. Ask that you keep your microphones on mute today, just so there's no feedback or funny noises. We'll hold questions until the end of the presentation, or you're welcome to use the chat. Marla will be moderating the chat. Please be aware that we're recording this, and it will be added, actually not to the Nickle's website, although the link is there. Everything is posted to our YouTube channel. If you need that link, just reach out and I'll make sure you know where it is. I'm about a week behind. It takes me about a week just to clean the video up and post it to YouTube. Participant names and the chat are not included. However, if you speak, if you ask a question at the end, your voice is part of the recording. So just a warning. My name is Michelle Hardy, and I'm one of the curators with Nickle Galleries and the host today. Marla is running shotgun. She's our front-end manager and the co-host on Zoom. And there she is. Thank you, Marla. And a reminder that next week we'll be featuring Diana Sherlock. Diana has been busily working on a project with Mary Shannon Will. And her talk will be People, Places, and Things, kind of a surprise. I think you'll really enjoy it, so do bookmark that for next week. And today's speaker, I've really been looking forward to one of my favorite art people in Alberta, the fabulous Mary Beth Laviolette, talking about Annora Brown and the Old Man's Garden. And I'd like just to say a few words about Mary Beth. You could say many, many, many words because she has such a wealth of experience. In fact, she has 30 years of experience of covering the visual arts. She's an independent curator and writer with a specialty in Alberta art. She has been, since 2010, she's researched, organized, and selected artwork in her curatorial practice, providing writing for exhibitions at Nickle Galleries, as well as large and small institutions across Alberta, and I think recently a project in Vancouver that maybe you can speak to, Mary Beth. Recent exhibitions have included the fabulous Before Digital project, post-1970 photography in Alberta at the Illingworth Kerr Gallery, Generations for Nickle Galleries, 50 years of art at the University of Calgary, Alberta and the Group of Seven, Shaping the Image of Alberta at the Red Deer Museum, and the Alberta Mistresses of the Modern, 1935 to 1975 at the Art Gallery of Alberta, and many, many, many more. She is a prolific author. Publications include an Alberta Art Chronicle, published in 2005, Alberta Art and Artists, published in 2007, co-written with Patricia Ainsley. More recently, A Delicate Art, Artists, Wildflowers, and Native Plants of the West, published in 2012. And of course, her most recent project has involved republishing The Old Man's Garden, The History and Lore of Southern Alberta Wildflowers by Alberta artist Annora Brown, which of course is the topic of her talk today. Mary Beth enjoys engaging with the public about art whenever and wherever possible. She's based in Canmore and she's an avid hiker and lover of wildflowers. Mary Beth, thank you for joining us. I'm going to switch my screen now.
Yeah. Hey, thanks very much, Michelle and Marla and the Nickle for inviting me to speak about this new book. Well, not really a new book. It was initially written in the 1930s, but I felt really strongly that another edition should be published. Annora Brown, she wrote the book in the 30s, as I mentioned, and then it was republished again in about 1970. That was about 50 years ago. And I work with a publisher out of Victoria, Rocky Mountain Books. You might have heard of that label. And they were quite keen to do this book as well. Now, let's just take a look at what we have here on the screen. On the right side, we have the inside cover of Old Man's Garden. And this has been reproduced in all 3 editions. And then we have a lovely observation here that was just made recently by a woman in Pincher Creek, Joyce Sassy, who has collected a lot of information about Annora. And I was curious, I've always been curious about who is on the horse ascending into the sky with a parade of wildflowers following, and have a read of this. And I think it's probably Annora herself. All right, let's go to the second slide, Michelle. Thank you. Here we go. Now here is a picture of the cover of Old Man's Garden, published by Hurtig not published by Hurtig. It was published by Gray Campbell. Gray Campbell had a ranch in the Porcupine Hills. And I just found out actually that Catherine and Peter White had a cabin there. So they would actually come down into Southern Alberta out of Banff and I guess work as artists there too. And here is the 2020 edition, which Rocky Mountain Books, I think, did a pretty good job of designing and presenting. There are 4 aspects to the book. Of course, there is the book itself, Old Man's Garden. I wrote an introduction for the book just to talk a bit about, who Annora Brown is and her significance, certainly in Canadian art. And then I also had a foreword written by the Right Reverend Sidney Black, who is a Siksika. He's Blackfoot himself. He has worked for many, many years in Southern Alberta as an Anglican minister, and he recently retired as the Bishop of Treaty 7. So thank you very much, Sidney, if you are there. Sidney, by the way, lives in Fort Macleod. So he's kind of in Annora Brown territory. The third slide, please. Okay. This is really interesting. This is a picture of Annora Brown, her sister, and a friend. The friend Amy is to the left. Annora is in the middle. She doesn't look that pleased. And then at the very back is her beloved sister, Kathleen. And you can sort of see, there's not a lot in terms of vegetation. shrubs, and so on. But according to Annora Brown's memoir and memories, it was a rich place for wildflowers and interesting native plants and birds and stuff. I was always interested in why she came up with the book Old Man's Garden, the title. And here's what she says from her memoir, the top quote. I lived by the old man's river, near the old man's playing ground, and had been familiar with the thought since childhood, so the title came naturally. And old man, of course, refers to Napi, or the old man of the Blackfoot Nation. And I hope I can do some justice in describing who Napi is, or how Annora conceived of this person. He was sort of a spiritual figure, kind of a quasi-god, but also a trickster. And he, in Annora's mind, was responsible for the beautiful place that she lived in, and hence the name Old Man's Garden. And he's very much a curator type figure in Blackfoot mythology. And if anybody has anything else to add to that later at the end of the talk, please do. But you can see his name, Napi, N-A-P-I. The next slide, please. Here we have a picture of Annora Brown. I think she's probably, I think this is from the 1940s. I think she is probably in Banff, where she was teaching in the summer for about 5 years. But here's some information about her. She was raised and educated in Fort Macleod, Alberta. Interestingly, her first exposure to European and Japanese art didn't come through travel or anything like that, but it came from these wonderful materials that were sent, I think, monthly by McGill University to Fort Macleod, to a study group called the Fortnightly Club. And it still is operating. It's a women's group devoted to the arts and humanities. Annora Brown, I think, got a lot from, she was very young at the time. Her mother was also the librarian for the club. But she did get introduced to art there, and she met people who had also an interest in art. Henrietta Muir Edwards, who is one of the figures in the famous Five, was from Fort Macleod. And Henrietta, who was also an artist herself, particularly in terms of China painting, did give Annora Brown a lot of art materials, because that was very, very hard to come by at that time. She talks about a lot of her art materials being things like Eaton's catalogs, where she could have some paper there in the catalog and use to decorate and, you know, create little scenes and stuff like that. She was encouraged by her mother in art. And here you can see in the middle what she did in 1925. And she wasn't the only Westerner. There were a number of people from the West who went out to the Ontario College of Art, because that's where you could get professional art training. And she just happened to be in a really good decade in the 1920s, when a number of the group of seven were there. And she learned a lot from them. She was particularly fond of Lauren Harris, who did not teach at the art college, but he did have a studio in the city. And he was somewhat, I think, of a sort of, well, Harris sort of told the students that would come and see him at the studio that he said, art must strive for something, something beyond the physical. And I think Annora Brown took that very much to heart. And I think to a certain extent, she saw her own landscape, her own environment as being, and here's what she said, a world not made of solid matter, but of light, space, and spirit. And I think that's kind of probably where she got that feeling, was from Harris. You can see later, she taught art through the University of Alberta Department Extension Program, went to many small centers in Southern Alberta, like Lethbridge, Brooks, Crow's Nest Pass, and so on. And then she had a great 5 years in the summer at the Banff Center. And then finally, as part of her practice, she did receive an honorary doctorate from the University of Lethbridge in 1971. And they awarded it to her for her dedication to what they called Western life and art. The next slide. This was a picture that I took in the Fort Macleod cemetery, the old one. This is where her parents are born, or sorry, are buried. I'm starting with her mother, Elizabeth Ethel Cody Brown. Elizabeth came from a very accomplished family in Toronto, teachers, doctors, and so on. And the Fortnightly Club, I found in their archives at the Galt Museum in Lethbridge, their motto, their slogan, "Let every woman be occupied in the highest ways of which her neighbor is capable." And I know that Elizabeth was certainly a suffragette. She had a lot of contact with the women involved with the famous 5 case in the 1920s. And I just have a feeling that she might have written this. And so I just decided to include that. Her father, Edmund Forrester Brown, is also quite interesting. He was born in London, England, into a family of engineers. And he came out west and joined the Northwest Mounted Police, served with them for almost 10 years. And then he was the town secretary treasurer for quite a long time. So I think the point that I wanted to make about her parents is that not all of the people who came out and settled in the West were migrants who were poor, without means, that kind of thing. That just simply is not true. There were lots of people who were well educated and did come from, a variety of different professional backgrounds. We have her brother Ted, who was the youngest. I don't know a lot about him. Annora doesn't really write about him in her memoir, but I do know that he was a banker, and I have a feeling he must have provided some support to the family. She had her sisters, Helen and Kathleen, who both died before 1920. Of course, epidemics during Annora Brown's time were not unusual. Helen and Annora were on their way back from Toronto on the train, and there was a big outbreak of typhoid, and Helen died from it. Annora survived, but it took her a long time to walk without a big limp. And then, of course, there was her sister, Kathleen, who was the oldest. And there was an outbreak of scarlet fever in the school where her mother taught, and there were about 12 students who died. So again, we see that the idea of death and disease was not foreign to that particular time. And of course, let's look at their neighbors south of Fort Macleod. Have a look here at the statistics for the Guinai, the blood reserve. Their population a year after Treaty 7 was signed was close to 2,500. And then by 1920, it was almost down to 1,000. And I'm sure, they had, there was a lot of tuberculosis. And I know that's certainly what Crowfoot and about 8 of his children died from. So there was that fact in that world where Annora Brown lived. I'll go to the next slide. Thank you. Oh, I mentioned that Annora Brown had been, who wrote this book in 1930. What happened was, and do you mind just going back to the last slide quickly? Take a look at her mother's death year, 1936. Elizabeth had come out west in 1891 from Toronto to teach. Her parents were aghast. Why are you going to the Wild West? Well, there were lots of people, I guess, attracted by it for whatever reasons. But in 1931, she had a massive stroke. And that kind of meant the end of Annora's life as a professional artist, if I can put it that way. She'd been hired by Mount Royal College in Calgary to start an art program. And she was very happy for a couple of years doing that and teaching. And then this disaster happened in 31. Her sisters were already dead by then. And so she came back to Fort Macleod in 31, looked after her mother until she died in 36. So it was a huge disaster in her life. And she's quite upfront about it in her memoir, Sketches from Life. It just completely turned her life upside down, going back, having to look after the family. And also it was the Depression, and she needed to also earn money for the family as well too. So let's go to the next slide. Thank you, Michelle. So what is she going to do? Well, she's busy usually with her parents in the morning, and then in the afternoon, she has some time to go out and explore the countryside. And she does two big things in the 1930s. One, of course, is Old Man's Garden, which is her book about the wildflowers and native plants. And then she also did a series of beautiful watercolors about her neighbors from both the Piikani and the Blood Reserve. And this one was done in 1935. And you can see it's quite large, 22 by 17 inches. You can see that it is an image of the here and now. In the background, you can see some, besides these very unique teepees, you can see also some, what looked to me like army tents set up. And in the middle, you can see a buggy, which I imagine would have been pulled by horses as well too. But all of her imagery, by and large, was about how she saw them in the 1930s. And of course, she's got a beautiful Chinook sky up above with those lenticular clouds. So Annora Brown did a number of these very large teepee watercolors. Some of them right now are, they're going to be shown at the McMichael collection in June as part of the Uninvited show, which is basically about women artists in the 1920s and 30s. I was curious about, well, okay, she's obviously on the reserve. She's there for an event, maybe, not sure what, but she does at one point write about how she got to know some of these people. And I'm sure some of them also came through her parents as well too. So let's just have a look at what she says here about Joe Healy, Mike Mountain Horse. So my point is that they're not strangers to her. And she's not, you know, I know people sometimes think that this kind of art emerges because the artist is a bit of a voyeur, but basically a stranger. And I just don't think that was the case with Annora Brown. And I thank Patricia Alderson. She did a master's thesis on Annora Brown about 15 years ago, and she dug this up, I believe, out of her archives. So we've got the flowers, the native plants, and also this wonderful indigenous subject matter. We'll go to the next slide. Here we go, Old Man's Garden. There are about 136 native plants and flowers that she discusses in the book. And she, with certain species, she has stories to tell about them. I mean, how did Indigenous people view them? How did they use them? How did the settler culture use them? You know, she has all kinds of stories to tell about these various plants. So it's not really a guidebook. Some people think that it is a guide for native plants, and you can certainly use it that way, but it's so much more than that. So let's look at this fantastic plant. It's a grass. It's called bear grass, and you see it in the Rockies in southern Alberta. And here's what she says on the first two paragraphs here are what she says in the introduction, and I'll let you read it. This is a book of gossip about the flowers of the West. And then she talks specifically in the chapter called Moon When the Grass Turns Green. She puts bear grass in that chapter because Moon When the Grass Turns Green is really about the springtime. And I'll let you read that as well too. And I'm just going to close my door because I can hear some noise in the background. Excuse me. All right. You know, and one of the things that she does do with her exploration of plants is she's not interested in doing botanical art. And that's not to dismiss it. It's a wonderful genre all on its own, but she never, ever considered herself to be a botanical artist. And you can see here, she's added some mountain background. There's some smaller kinds of plant growth at the bottom. And I'll show you a picture of what bear grass looks like, a photograph I took myself. That'll be a little bit later. How about the next one? Thank you. Here's another one. This is from the chapter Old Man's Vegetable Garden. So you can sort of see the, I guess you can call it the conceit. The book is kind of organized around how she thought or perceived Native people might look at these particular plants. And so cow parsnip, of course, is used as a vegetable. And I'll let you read the first paragraph And then in the second paragraph, she, and this is also part of her section on cow parsnip, she talks about the Sundance of the Blackfeet, which would be in Montana. And she describes its role in terms of the construction of the Medicine Lodge. And I think it's, I also wanted to draw attention to the fact that under the Indian Act, the 1880 potlatch law made it a criminal offense to celebrate these ceremonies. But this kind of ceremonial practice was going on to a certain extent. I'm sure she must have seen some of it herself. But anyways, that's just to give you a bit of context about the Sundance. Let's go to, well, let's just have a look at this image. Oh, boy, it's really pretty expressive. Annora Brown always talked about the fact that she was really interested in the personality of the plant, its character. And so again, it wasn't about having an exact depiction of a flower, a plant, whatever. And she's quite expressive. And I'm going to talk also a little bit about these black and white prints and how they were made. But we'll go to the next one. Oh, here we are. This was just before the big fire they had in Waterton in 2017. And to the left, we see the amazing bear grass, sometimes 3 to 4 feet high. They seem to like to grow in large clusters together. So when you come across them, they are really, really, really impressive. They're not always abundant every year. I've heard that they have some years where they have some years when they are kind of dormant and you won't see very many of them around. And then also in Waterton, we have to the right, the beautiful cow parsnip. We get that all over Alberta, but down in that part of the world, it tends to be, the plant tends to grow a lot higher, and the cluster of flowers at the top, they can be the size of a dish, a big dinner dish. So that's another plant that is always very welcomed to see in the early summer. We'll go to the next one. Thank you, Michelle. Here's some information about how these were made. These are called scratch board prints. And I have a feeling that when we were kids, we used to play around with scratch board. But anyways, Annora Brown, part of her living she made as an illustrator. And so scratchboard prints would have been something quite useful for that sort of, that kind of work. And I say here that it's a form of direct engraving where the black India ink surface is scratched or engraved to reveal a white layer of made up of china clay below. And you can see here with the Indian paintbrush that she has done, instead of having a black background, which we saw with the other plants, she has completely scraped most of it away and worked with the black as the dominant compositional tool, I guess we can say. Look to the right here. We have a beautiful drawing by Nora. This is a drawing from the Nichols collection. And when I saw this, I was quite struck by how similar they are. And I wondered maybe if this drawing had been done sometime in the 1930s, particularly with that frond of grass hanging over. The paintbrush is, quite dominant as well too. So it was, thank you very much, Michelle, for showing me some of these drawings. I'd never seen them before. I've only seen her drawings in her her sketchbooks and things like that, but these are particularly nice. And we'll go to the next one. Thank you. This is one of mine that always kind of makes me smile. In the 1930s, school children in Alberta were asked, what do you think should be the provincial flower of the province? I guess they were doing that sort of thing at that time. And the vote came in, and I guess the children wanted the wild rose. And so here we have, to the left, we have Annora's depiction of the wild rose, with, of course, a small nest and probably a robin. And then to the right, we have a work that she did, and I believe this would have also been done in the 1930s, but look at how small it is. It's 3.5 inches by 6 inches. And what she was doing in the 30s as a way to make money was she was selling these small, almost miniatures for $1 a piece. And she really thought that, perhaps people could afford $1 and have something beautiful to look at. And so these are quite rare. I've seen some in a private collection in Fort Macleod. And then there are also some in the Alberta Foundation for the Arts in their collection. So the wild rose is, of course, a favorite of school children. But what I read or I hear from Annora Brown in Old Man's Garden, and it's in the chapter called Moon of the Flowers. The agricultural departments of the Western provinces, be noted, are not hampered by poetry about the rose. Roses, they say, are weeds. And here's the advice they give for eradication. Plow deeply using a sharp share, and then cultivate throughout the season with a spring tooth cultivator. So essentially what you're doing is you're just kind of ripping them up and pulling them underground and things like that. So this sort of thing would always disturb Annora Brown. I mean, she really did have a strong, she was a naturalist. And she had a really strong feeling for the ecology. And even with one of her teachers at the Ontario College of Art, Robert Holmes, who is a great wildflower artist. His work is found, I'm sure, in the collections of the AGO and so on. Both he and Annora Brown shared a concern for what was happening to the wildflowers in their own particular region where they lived. And I think she got a lot of encouragement from Robert Holmes, who taught her design, to think about these flowers also in terms of their intrinsic value, in terms of their value to the environment and so on. So let's go to the next one. Now, this is at the top is a quote. She says, "When I look deep into the heart of a flower, I feel as if a presence surrounds me, as if the spirits of the earth were coming out to share this moment with me. I'm not satisfied until the music and poetry I desire are working into the painting." So obviously, this kind of, again, goes back to Lauren Harris's idea about there having to be something more in a work of art than just, a factual, physical description. this is later work that she did. The Wild Rose, which she did in 1960, and then The Shooting Stars. These works, which are quite large, are all in the collection of the Glenbow Museum. There's about 200 of them, but she did many more of them because her, after Old Man's Garden, she became quite popular. I think one of the things that interests me too is that her depiction of the wild roses on a branch and the shooting stars are like in two totally different universes. And I think there's some real magic going on with her depiction of the shooting stars. And also she had in some of her watercolors, she would also leave some of the leaves and the ground cover not completely filled in. She also used a material, it's a milky substance called casein, where she could make the watercolor more opaque. So it had more solidity to it. They weren't always so transparent. Let's go to the next one, thank you. Annora Brown, after she published Old Man's Garden in 1954, received a commission from the Glenbow Foundation. They wanted 200 watercolors of native plants. And this was kind of a dream commission. I mean, even for an artist today, that would be a real dream commission. And so she worked, I think probably 3 years, maybe 4, on this commission, and probably completed about 500 altogether, some of which she sold and went into private collections. She said about, this commission, which helped her a great deal. She said about it that, even at this point in time in the early 1960s, she talks about how it's surprising to her that critics cannot look at this as art. She says she said, my work is continually being included in exhibitions of botanical works. In that company, they are really out of place. Instead, they are poetical interpretations of nature. And she said, I had unknowingly placed myself between two worlds. And I think to a certain extent, that is certainly even true today. And I think there's also an issue of gender, which enters this discussion as well too. It's women who primarily do botanical art, although there have been some very, very good male artists as well too. But it's seen as a kind of a woman's art form. And I think that's probably still even true today. I think a lot of people, may not see these within the same kind of category of art. Art is quite hierarchical in terms of how it values subject matter, and wildflowers are kind of at the bottom of the list, I think. We'll go to the next slide, thank you. Here's a picture of Annora Brown. She's about 82. She's come back to Alberta to receive her honorary doctorate of laws from the University of Lethbridge. And they have a nice reception for her at Christ Church in Fort Macleod. That church is still standing. I think it was built in the 1890s. It was certainly where her parents were married. And Annora Brown also designed a piece of stained glass for the church as well too. But here you can see her with a collection of art from her neighbors, from people who have collected her flowers, her landscapes. She certainly did some historical depictions as well too. And I think at this particular point in time, Annora Brown is no longer so considered the town eccentric, because certainly when she went back to Fort Macleod in the 1930s, she was really kind of considered an oddball. And a lot of people couldn't really understand what her subject matter was all about. She did some wonderful paintings of grain elevators, which at that time were considered to be quite ugly. And she often would have the comment, "Why are you painting them? They're so ugly." It just kind of shows you, and it was also suggested to her that she should probably go over to Europe, where she might find something worthwhile to paint. So, you know, that's a real kind of colonial sort of mentality. And that's really what she really grew up among. And I think it's really to her tribute to her character that she stuck with the subject matter of Old Man's Garden. And we'll go to the last one. Thank you. I wanted to provide you with some information about where you can see some of Annora Brown's work. All of Annora Brown's art in Glenbow's collection, there's 260 works, are online. And so here is the address for it. And then her archives, her writings and everything else like that are at the University of Alberta in Edmonton. Her memoir, Annora Brown Sketches from Life, published in 1981. It's a wonderful read. It's just got a lot of personality. I think in some ways she was kind of a larger than life person. And then to the right is a book that I did. Michelle mentioned it. I did this book about 6 Alberta wildflower artists, and it was also published by Rocky Mountain Books. And what I did is I was kind of interested in looking at about 100 years of wildflower art in the province, because there have been some pretty major practitioners, people like Mary Schaefer, Mary Vaux, Annora Brown, Robert Sinclair, who's still alive today, Carol Harmon as well too, the photographer. So that's pretty much what I have to say now. I can open it up to some questions, comments. Oh.
Thank you, Mary Beth. That was wonderful. If you would like to unmute yourself and ask Mary Beth a question, go ahead, or you're welcome to use the chat bar.
Michelle, there is a couple of questions in the chat. If you just scroll up a little bit.
Okay, thank you.
I was watching but didn't want to interrupt.
Here's one from Aaron. Mary Beth, I wonder if you know of any connection with Annora and the Blackfoot art that was commissioned for the walls of the Prince of Wales Hotel. Apparently it was removed in the 60s. Total side question, I realize, but a really interesting side question.
Yeah, you know, I forget the name of the artist who was commissioned to do that, and I could look it up. I don't know if she must have been aware of it. I would think she must have been aware of it. And she might have even known the artist as well too. She was in Fort Macleod until 1964. And then she kind of retired and moved to Vancouver Island. But I can find you the name of the artist if you want to know who it is.
Intrigued. I'm just looking to see if there are other questions here, some comments. I often say that all plants are enthusiastic. Those we call weeds are the most successful ones. Just shows if you make yourself too available, people might treat you like a weed. Women artists and flowers makes me think of Mary Delaney's flower collages, 18th century ? Brilliant works, but considered all women's handiwork.
Great book.
Just a comment. I remember my good friend Rosalind Anderson her father was, a superintendent of Calgary schools. He was among a group of teacher friends who collected Annora Brown's work. I remember going over to a woman in her 90s who lived in Cambrian Heights, and I was invited to pick the plums from her trees. And then she invited me inside, and her house was filled with really almost nothing but Annora Brown's work.
Oh my God. Do you remember her name?
I can ask. My friend now lives in Arkansas, but but she knows. Her first name is Doris, and in fact, she gave me a copy of
Sketches from Life. Yeah, it's a great read.
Sketches from Life. I also feel really grateful to some of the people that helped save Nose Hill, because then they gave me this book in the late 80s.
Yeah.
Because we were saving a little patch of Nose Hill at Dr. E.W. Coffin's school. And they said, in this book are going to be, there's going to be invaluable stuff in there that you'll want to know to pass along to the students. So I've used this book. It's pretty ragged now. For just,
like mine.
I'm so thrilled that you're focusing on Annora Brown. Do they know about her at the Banff Center, I wonder?
Well, she was there during a great time for the Banff Center when they were teaching a lot of landscape painting and stuff like that. If you were a landscape artist, it must have been pretty phenomenal to be there, because people like A.Y. Jackson was there, and a bunch of names. They're kind of slipping away from me. H.G. Glide was there, and so on. Walter Phillips. I have never come across any of Annora Brown's art in the Banff Center collection, but it's not to say that it isn't there. I just haven't done it very thoroughly. And I've asked, and people just say, well, who's Annora Brown? Yeah.
Garfield Anderson, who was one of the superintendents for the Calgary board, has passed away now, but he had a big collection of her art too. So I bet his children now have his collection. I'll find out.
Oh, please do. I would so love to see. Annora Brown is more avidly collected now. You sometimes see her work in auctions, particularly her Wildflower work and stuff like that. So yeah, if you want to get in touch with me, please do.
Yeah, and one piece is on the wall, as a mural underneath the in the underpass at 4th Street. Sean took us on her. Sean Hunter took us past it on one of her Jane's walks.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Mary Beth, there's another question from Catherine. Now that you know about Annora being caught between science and art, her work not being shown as serious art, will you consider continuing research into an exhibition?
Oh, I would love to. I absolutely would love to do that. And I would love to actually, I would love to do that. I'd have to think about it a bit more, but there's some, I think it could be a really interesting show. Very, very interesting show.
I bet it would be a really popular show.
Oh, I think it would be. Yep. And I think there's some other artists, from, just like some of the artists in my book, A Delicate Art, who I think would do quite well as well too. But art about floral art as a subject matter, it's just never rated very highly. And she must have been really aware of that even when she was at the art college. But as I said, she did get some real encouragement from people like Robert Holmes.
And there's, I think, a follow-up question from Aaron Ari, the commissioned Blackfoot artist's name, and was the art saved when it was moved from the hotel?
Boy, I don't know. I honestly don't know. And I guess, I mean, there has been a book written about the Prince of Wales Hotel, and I guess maybe that author would be the first person to ask if they, because surely they would know about the story about those big murals that were done. Who knows? They could be down in the basement. No, seriously. Sometimes that's what happens.
Mary Beth, I have a question. Somebody wanted to know where they could get a copy of the book.
Oh, well, okay, you can get a copy of the book in Calgary. I know Pages is selling it.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and yeah, Pages is selling it. I'm just trying to think of the name of the other store. Oh, can't remember it right now. Oh, does Indigo have it? Have I seen it there? You could check with Indigo too. Go online.
Certainly available through Amazon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is available through Amazon for sure.
And Shelf Life. Thank you, Catherine.
Oh, Shelf Life.
Shelf
That's
Life,
right. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, I hate to cut this off, but it is about 1:02, and
Oh, wow, just on time.
I know, and we're all just so grateful, Mary Beth, that you've done this research and shared this with the wonderful book and with this wonderful presentation. I'll remind all of you that next week, Diana Sherlock will be here to talk about Mary Shannon Will, and that
That'll be a
will
great
be a
talk.
wonderful presentation, I'm sure. But they just get better and better and better. Mary Beth's presentation will be cleaned up and posted to YouTube. So if you want to share it or watch it again, it should be available on our YouTube station. Oh, give me 4 or 5 days. I'll let you know. And please come back and join us next week. Mary Beth, thank you so much.
All right. Thank you very much. And thank you for giving me some time. I really, really appreciate it, because the book was released during COVID, during the lockdown. It was, everything got canceled.
I know. It's kind of a tree that falls in a forest.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Exactly.